then drop off a beautiful gallery. It's education for Palestine, and I strongly encourage everyone to walk around and look through that before you leave. It's absolutely beautiful. And with that, I would like to say we're going to watch a short film, and then after that, Bob Bassouf will be leading us in discussion, or speaking, and then led discussion by Phil later on. So,
Israel's bombardment of Gaza began 75 days ago on October 7th, just hours after Hamas's attack on Israel. Health authorities in Gaza say at least 19,600 Palestinians have been killed so far. Thousands are feared to be still trapped under the rubble.
You got it.
Just before this broadcast, Israel struck residential buildings in the southern city of Rafah near the Kuwaiti Special Hospital. A reporter from Al Jazeera, Hani Mahmoud, was on the air when the attack occurred.
We're getting into yes. Oh my God! Did you hear that? Yes. Oh my God! Oh. That's the hospital. That's the hospital. That's the hospital. Are you guys hearing that?
Yes, we are hearing that, Henny. Are you okay? Are you in the same place? Continue to talk.
Why, Hani Mahmoud asks the Al Jazeera reporter. Al Jazeera reports the Israeli attack destroyed a large mosque in Rafah, as well as 2 residential homes. Israeli drones had been seen in the sky just before the strikes. Earlier, an Israeli attack on the Jabalia refugee camp killed at least 46 Palestinians and wounded dozens. The United Nations Security Council is expected to vote on a new Gaza resolution today. The vote was postponed Tuesday after the United States voiced opposition to a draft of the resolution. On December 8th, the United States vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for ceasefire. This all comes as tension is growing in the Red Sea. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has announced the U.S. will lead a new military task force to protect ships in the Red Sea following a number of attacks by Houthi forces from Yemen. We're joined now by Rashid Khalidi, the Edward Said Professor of Modern Arab Studies at Columbia University here in New York. He's the author of several books, including his latest, The 100 Years' War on Palestine. His recent opinion piece for the Los Angeles Times is headlined, How the U.S. Has Fueled Israel's Decades-Long War on Palestinians. Professor Khalidi, I'm wondering if you can start off by just talking about the situation overall in Gaza. Your family is from the West Bank. You also have family in Gaza. And I want to just point out that I particularly named the journalist with Al Jazeera, Hani Mahmoud, because it has been so horrifying to only name journalists after they have been killed, and so many scores of them have died. Hani Mahmoud's bravery is astounding as we watch him through the Gaza Strip, and today, in the midst of this attack. Take it from there, Professor Khalidi.
He's very fortunate that he's still alive. Over 90 journalists have been killed in Gaza we're now in the 11th week of this war. 283 healthcare workers have been killed. 135 United Nations workers have been killed. It's the highest death toll the United Nations has ever suffered in its entire history. And that's just a tip of the iceberg. You cited a number of 20,000 people earlier on apparently having been killed. Probably the number is much higher because there are so many thousands of people buried under the rubble or missing. And we will probably not know the final death toll until many, many months from now when operations to remove the ruins of the buildings that have been destroyed are completed. The situation in Gaza is unspeakable. What we hear from my niece's family there is, I can't describe it. It's beyond belief. People are scrambling for the basic necessities of life and are sometimes not finding firewood to heat water and cook enough water for everybody to have sufficient water to drink, let alone wash. I could go on. It is unspeakable. It is intolerable. And the tragic thing about it is that this is clearly intended. Neither our government nor the Israeli government recognize the fact that what is happening there is causing this immiseration of over 2 million people. And this could easily be stopped. And should be stopped. I can't understand how this country can allow this to continue. The idea that going after Hamas entails the destruction of more than half of the housing in Gaza. The idea that going after Hamas entails the wounding of 50,000 people and the killing of 20,000. It's incomprehensible to me.
Well, Professor Halliday, we've seen massive, unprecedented demonstrations in support of the Palestinians throughout the world. The majority of governments in the General Assembly, overwhelming majority, have called for a ceasefire, yet the Security Council continues to be a roadblock, especially in the United States. I wanted to ask you about, there have been numerous media reports of attacks on U.S. troops in Syria and Iraq that are threatening to expand the conflict beyond just the occupied territories in Gaza. But what the heck are U.S. troops still doing in those two countries? Has Congress authorized their presence there? Do the governments of those countries even want them there?
Well, the government of Syria, the dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad, certainly doesn't want them. And the pretext for their being in Syria is against the Islamic State. I don't think there is any authorization for their being. The troops that are in Iraq are supposedly engaged in training the Iraqi army, but there's a great deal of opposition in Iraq, even though the Iraqi government has accepted their presence there. There's a great deal of opposition in the Iraqi parliament to the presence of U.S. forces in Iraq. And I think what we're seeing are attacks, whether from Yemen on shipping or firing missiles at Israel, or attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq or in Syria, which are a response to what Israel is doing in Gaza. And the same is true, obviously, of the fighting that's going on between Hezbollah and the Israeli army along Israel's northern frontiers. And the fear is that this could possibly expand.
Can you talk about also what's happening in the Red Sea? You have a dozen corporations who say they won't ship their goods through the Red Sea. You have U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announcing a 10-nation coalition to protect trading interests there, including Bahrain, Canada, France, Italy, the UK, the Seychelles. Houthi officials saying that their drone and missile attacks will continue as long as Israel bombards Gaza.
There is enormous anger in the Arab world about what is happening in Gaza. Things that Americans don't see enough of. The scenes of what is actually happening in Gaza are being watched all over the Arab world and across much of the world. And the anger that people have and their frustration at the unwillingness of their governments to do more to try and stop this.
Professor, we only have a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to ask you, you said that there's an unquestionable connection of Judaism and the Jewish people to the Holy Land, and yet that the Israeli state is a settler colonial project. And in your LA Times piece recently, you called it, the assault on Gaza, the last colonial war of the modern age. Would you elaborate?
Right. Sure. This goes back to the nature of Zionism. Zionism is a national project which distinguishes it from every other settler colonial movement project. But at the same time, it was a self-identified colonial project. The Jewish Colonization Agency, the Palestinian Jewish Colonization Agency, is the term that organization, which existed until 1958, applied to itself. That was something that was accepted by early Zionist leaders. They argued they had a claim to the Holy Land. There's a connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. All of this is true, that there is such an attachment and such a connection. But Zionism is a European colonial project backed by imperialism, British imperialism, and which intended to replace an indigenous population with a Jewish population. As Zev Jabotinsky said, we want to transform Palestine into the land of Israel. And that meant a demographic transformation. And that meant dispossession of the population and theft of their land, as happens in every separate colonial scenario. So Israel is both the result of a national project, Zionism, and the result of a separate colonial project. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. There's actually no contradiction between it. And it's unique in that it was not just an extension of a mother country's population and sovereignty. It had its own independent ambitions to establish a Jewish state, not a British state. Came in under the protection of Britain, but it had its own aims, separate, independent aims. So it's a unique phenomenon in the modern world. And it learned everything it did from the British. The Israeli army's earliest leaders were trained by British colonial counterinsurgency specialists to blow up houses over the heads of their residents, to shoot prisoners, to attack villages at night. This is British counterinsurgency, which was transmitted to Israeli members of the Palmach and the Haganah in the 1930s in order for them to help the British fight the Palestinians. And those are the founders of the Israeli army. Moshe Dayan was trained by British counterinsurgency specialists. Yigal Allon, Yitzhak Sadeh, many of the leading figures in what became the Israeli army have that training. And Israel is using laws left over, the 1945 Defense Emergency Regulations, under which people are put in administrative detention. No indictment, no trial, no conviction, nothing. They're just put in jail and kept there. That's a British 1945 emergency regulation. That's a typical colonial instrument. So this is a colonial war fought in order to maintain the supremacy of this group, which has taken the country over at the expense of the indigenous Palestinian population. The connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel is, in my view, incontrovertible. But that in and of itself doesn't justify the colonial methods that have been used in the establishment and the maintenance of Israel's supremacy over now the entirety of Palestine, from the river to the sea.
Rashid Khalidi, Edward Said, Professor of Modern Arab Studies at Columbia University, author of a number of books, including The 100 Years' War on Palestine. We'll link to your opinion piece for the LA Times, headlined How the U.S. Has Fueled Israel's Decades-Long War on Palestinians. Democracy Now! Is funded by viewers like you. Please give today at democracynow.org/give.
Just take a moment here and process all that, I'm sure. Bob Bassuth is going to be coming up shortly and speaking with us, and after that, Phil Anderson and maybe a few others would like to lead.
To know how to react. Any thoughts to share, or just to get out?
You've got to get out of there.
Yeah, it's I have a very low opinion of the U.S. and supposedly U.S. democracy, very, very low. But even for me, it astounds me how this can go on and on as it is. Even I'm astounded, and that's hard to do. Well, maybe just a couple of thoughts, though. I mean, what do you think are some of the main ideas here that we should carry away from this? I mean, he said a lot of things, but there are a couple of themes, I think, that we could take into our political lives. Any ideas? Donna says, get out of there, yeah. But when you say get out of there, who's getting out of there? I didn't have to fight in Vietnam, but I spent a year studying Vietnamese and 2 more years studying interrogation techniques, and then I was supposed to ship out, and I didn't go at the last minute because they changed my orders because they were winding down the numbers. So I say that because I'm very, very cranky about what I hear from the United States government about anything, but especially about war and peace and all the wonderful things we're doing in the world to bring health and happiness to all kinds of people around the world. It's, and I don't care who's president, I don't give a shit if they're Republican or Democrat or whatever. It's always the same, And there are, and one of the articles on that thing is, I I'll stop after that. The many articles by Caitlin Johnstone, I don't know if anybody knows her or reads her. She's an Australian who's like a dog on a bone about U.S. imperialism and the empire. She is really good. I put her website there, and she had this article there about something like that. She says, yeah, Caitlin Johnstone, bad on foreign policy, but good on domestic policy is just American supremacist psychopathy. That's what it is. But the thing is, what do we do about it? I'm at loss. I'm more depressed and discouraged and hopeless than I've ever been in my life. And I'm not a cheery personality anyway, I'll tell you.
From our conversation, that really, that I really latched onto, and I wish I could use it somehow, is that he says the Israeli army is composed almost entirely of reservists now. And they have absolutely no, they have like almost no stomach for what they're doing. They have to do it because their commanding officers tell them to do it. But he says they're not making any progress. They are going back to the same battle scenes over and over and over again and fighting the same battles with Hamas, and they're making no progress whatsoever, and they are sick and tired of it. So the Israeli army, the grunts, the ones who are actually doing the fighting, don't see any point to any of this. They're making, like I said, no progress whatsoever, and they're just getting exhausted. And I think that's, that's the meme. The thing is like when the Israeli army starts to protest, but none of them are going to go on camera and say this, right? Because it's probably worthy of a court-martial or something. But that's the situation within the IDF itself. And I find that, it's extremely depressing. I agree. I feel like as hopeless as more hopeless than I've ever felt. But with those types of things, that gives me hope. And you only find that out by talking to someone on the other side and seeing what's really going on, what they're really thinking. And so, I would encourage people to do that, reach out and talk to people who we consider others and, see what's going on and just share your feelings.
It's a good point you brought up. But the Gaza Strip, there's so much destruction. Everything is being destroyed there. People, how are they going to live with no shelter? It's very hard there. You talk about all the death that hasn't been reported that possibly might. I don't know what our country's doing to, if you watch the local news, or maybe the international news at 5:30, there's very little being spoken about this stuff.
Yeah. That's what I think education is the key. I don't think the American people know the history, starting in 1948, and why groups like Hamas even exist, because of all of the human rights violation and the illegal taking of land that has gone on since that time.
Yes.
And if people really knew the history, saw the maps of Palestine, how the land has been taken away, find out how much money the American government is actually giving every single day.
Well, it reminds me of the PLO, and Yasser Arafat, we kept hearing about them in the same way. And they were responding to something that they were, overcome with, the imperialism of the United States and Israel. And I remember really vividly that guy, Ted Koppel, he had this, this evening program, and there was a guy named Moshe Aaron. He was the ambassador to the United States from Israel. And I swear to God, that guy came on that program with the sole purpose of saying PLO terrorists, PLO terrorists. He probably said it 100 times, in that space of that short interview, And that's, remember Khalidi was talking about the media, the complicity of the media. That is really propaganda, it's just unbelievable. So, there are sources that, are reliable, people that are telling the truth, but they don't work for NPR or PBS.
Seeing through the eyes of these doctors' reports that you mentioned, it's just so unsettling. I mean, how could they justify, live with themselves for targeting children,
Yeah.
innocent children?
They can't justify it, and many of those Israeli soldiers are going to, whenever this ends, or even now, are probably experiencing moral injury and PTSD.
Bob, you talked about, what can we do? And it makes me think back to the era of the Vietnam War. And I recall that the time period between when people first started saying, wait a minute, this might not be a good thing, to demonstrating and burning flags and all of that, it was a period of many years. It's not, what we want to accomplish cannot be accomplished in a year or 2 or 3, and that's the hard thing for me to accept, because I don't think it's going to be resolved in my lifetime. There will come a point when the rest of the world, the United States included, will recognize that what we have done, what we have neglected to do, what we have supported was horribly wrong. Just like when we first started demonstrating back in Chicago, where we lived, against the Vietnam War, people were throwing bottles out their windows saying, get out of here, you're not American, you don't like it here, get out. And then, it took so long before the United States realized that that war was wrong. It was wrong, but you couldn't say that at the time. So I think that's what we're feeling now. We are a small group of people here in this community, and there are many small groups and many small communities. And we're all feeling the same thing, like this is just the beginning of a bigger protest that will happen over the years, and finally we'll make our point.
I remember also Chomsky made a comment, this is many, many years ago, and I tried to find it online because I wanted to share, but he said the Palestinians are really, there's no hope unless and until the U.S. empire falls.
But if we all say that, well, there's no hope, and what we're doing is spinning our wheels and nobody's paying attention, individually, and I'm assuming that all of you feel the same way, individually, we can't say, okay, well, I can't do anything, it's all hopeless, so I'm just going to let it go. You can't do that. Your conscience will not let you do that. You have to keep speaking out. You have to keep standing up there, as you said, standing up in public and saying, this is wrong, this is wrong. And hope that more and more people will begin to wonder, why are those people standing out there? What are they doing with waving that Palestinian flag? What the heck is that all about? Are they anti-American or something?
Yeah, right.
Floods and fires.
I wanted to address Linda's comments there about hopelessness and what we can do and so forth. There's an organization called World Beyond War. And World Beyond War has an excellent booklet, and I can't always get the name of it right. It's the Alternative Global Security System, an alternative to war. It's about a half-inch thick, 8.5 by 11, very easy to scan, very good. I don't have a copy of it with me today. But this is a comprehensive, practical plan as to how we can go about achieving world peace. And one of the things they say in there is we have to build a culture of peace instead of a culture of war. Our country has been involved since the get-go of this country, clear back even before the Revolutionary War, in having a culture of violence and war. Martin Luther King said back in 1968, my country is the biggest purveyor of violence in the world today. Well, what we're doing today is part of that building a culture of peace. Really. Can we do something like this every couple of months and maybe have 50 people here next time? Or
Well, on
by
that
this
note,
time next year, we have 100
we're working on it. We're planning a third
Yeah.
forum, and you brought up World
She's got
Beyond
the
War.
hook, so I guess it's time for us to quit.
Well, no, we got a little bit more time here. We are reminding the library does close at 7, so we do need to be closed by then. But this is an amazing conversation, and building community and connections is part of education. And we need to remember that, because a lot of us are separate in our lives, and a lot of us have different situations. That's part of a huge symptom of crumbling capitalism. They want us to be separated and tired and not have these connections and families. So that is a big act of education, is building community as well. Thank you, Bob and Phil. And Jason, did you want to speak a little bit?
One of the reasons that military spending is so crazy in this country is because we're one of the most xenophobic countries on earth, and it's all driven by fear.
Yeah.
Fear is the reason people invest in guns. Fear is the reason we build bombs. Fear, and your average American is just afraid of the outside world. So just talking, sharing any experiences you've had traveling. If you met a Palestinian, tell them about this nice Palestinian person you met.
Well, we are going to be having the third forum here at the Superior Public Library, and we'll be encouraging it. And in Superior, we're also hosting Women in Black silent vigils every Sunday, noon to 12:30. And for Superior, it's going pretty strong. I mean, we have anywhere from 4 of us to 12 of us pretty consistently. Even the day that we had to take a break, we all met up at the corner here, right in the public community space, and we've recently had some more activism as well. Having forums like this, we want to be inclusive and have a wide range of people, so thank you tonight, and let's remember that next time you can be involved and add more into this. Phil actually has...
What they wanted you to do is sign on to a letter to Kamala Harris, asking her to reconsider the Biden policy, and if she expects to get elected, she probably should think about abandoning that policy.
I think she's
Let's
already.
add to that, Phil. All of our representatives and senators.
Yeah.
We need
Oh.
to keep
Yeah.
Yep.
emailing them constantly or calling or whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
They need to know, and I think they do pay attention to the numbers.
Yeah.
How many people call on a certain topic and what they're asking for.
They kind of
It makes the difference because they have to worry about whether they're going to get reelected and whether they're popular or not.
That's actually all they care about right now. Seriously,
Very well said, it's important.
yeah. That's all they care about. So let them know. Right now, we're in this moment where they don't temporarily have to really care because of their opponent. It's like they feel confident they're going to get reelected anyway. But Harris is receptive. I mean, she's publicly said she thinks a two-state solution is the only real solution, and I think she would be more. I think she'd be stronger. She'd handle Netanyahu.
On a positive note, a characteristic for me is that there's needs to be encouragement for those who are doing the right thing. I mean, one of them is Senator Jen McEwen in Duluth. Is just really unwavering about all these things, and what's also Ashley Grimm and the city. Those two have been very good on these things. So let them know that they're doing the right thing.
Well, let's give a big round of applause for everyone showing up and